So, welcome everyone to our fireside chat for this evening. I'm super excited about this topic because I know that even as long as I've been doing AAC work, access questions are always burning in my mind. So, I'm thrilled to see all of you here, and I'll just briefly let you know who we have joining us as our guests. We've got Kristin here on the top left of my screen. I don't know where she is on yours. Maybe you can wave, Kristin, and let everybody know who you
Hello.
are. And we also have Christie here, and they're gonna tell you each about each of them on their own in their own words because they can do a better job than I. Just a couple housekeeping rules or guidelines before we get going. Feel free to turn your mic on and contribute to the conversation. Mute when you're not speaking, just to help everybody be able to hear. If you have something to say and you need more time, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll be keeping an eye on that raise hand feature and also on the gallery for anybody who wants to raise a physical hand. I'll be moderating the chat and helping Christie and Kristin get questions that are live, but they also have some questions from your registration that they're going to be working from today as well. All right, I think that's all I have to say for now. I'll turn it over to Kristin and Christie.
All right, well, I will start. My name is Christin Whitfield, and I am a speech pathologist. I have been working for, 26 years, I think. I just recently had to do the math and figure out how long I have been privileged to be involved in the lives in a small way of a lot of different individuals with complex communication needs. And I have really thoroughly enjoyed getting to work with people in a rehab hospital, private clinics, private practice, home-based care, preschools, different settings, really always focusing on working with individuals with complex communication needs. And along with that, oftentimes more complex bodies that require this alternative access or alternate access that we're going to be talking about tonight. So I look forward to sharing some things that I've learned over the years, but also learning from you as we go through this. And I feel like I should be sitting downstairs in front of my fireplace, but I live in Virginia Beach right now and it's still 80 degrees outside. So this is like I put on a long sleeve shirt for the first time in months. So that's the best I could do. So I will let Christie introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christie. I'm really excited to be here with you this evening. I am also a speech language pathologist. I've been working as a speech pathologist for 9 years. 10 years is quickly coming up. And my background, similar to Kristin, I've worked really in a variety of settings, also in a variety of states. I've worked in Louisiana, Texas, and New Jersey. But primarily, most of my time has been working with the pediatric population, as well as those pediatric clients who do present with complex communication needs as well as complex bodies. So really kind of thinking outside the box to kind of assess and see what is going to be the best mode of access so that they can utilize AAC in the most efficient way. But for the last 2 years, I have been a regional sales consultant with Control Bionics. So if you're not familiar, Control Bionics is the maker of a couple of alternative access AAC devices. It's kind of a nice way to put it. We offer eye gaze as well as switch access. So a big part of my role in the company is to help assess as well as train care teams and individual clients to kind of utilize our device. So I feel like my experience has grown in the area of alternative access specifically, I would say, over the last couple of years. So I'm excited to kind of be on and share this with you guys. To piggyback on Kristin's comment of being by a fireplace, I am now currently located in Oklahoma where it's still 95 degrees. So I don't need a fireplace. I can just go outside. It still feels like a fire outside at this point in time, but hoping for some cooler weather soon.
Oh, well, I think you can probably tell by the way I neglected to share that I also work for Control Bionics, that both Christie and I kind of think of ourselves as speech pathologists first, and we happen to work for manufacturers of communication devices right now. But we're really here to talk about access to low tech, access to high tech, access to in general, not specific to what we do. That being said, we may end up giving some examples that come from working with clients that we've worked with recently. Not in any way trying to exclude anyone, but really just focusing on, some recent examples. So the way we thought we would approach this is spend just a couple of minutes talking about access in general. We've found that not everyone comes from the same place of knowing kind of what all the options are that are out there. And then all of a sudden we throw out this alternate access. So we figured we should probably talk about the multiple different ways of access. It shouldn't take very long. Please do stop me and ask questions along the way. And then we figured we would start with some of the questions that were submitted ahead of time. And then, like Tana said, feel free to ask questions as we go, however it's easiest for you, whether that's through chat or, as Tana mentioned, raising your hand with the Zoom hand or raising your physical hand. We'll figure out how to make sure that we get questions answered. So I'm going to take just a second and share my screen and then share put my presentation into presentation mode so that you don't have to see all of my notes and extra things on the screen. There we go. All right. So as far as accessing AAC selection methods or access methods, they're divided a couple different ways with several different names, but the way we're going to start off by talking about them first are the categories of direct selection and then indirect selection. So direct selection simply means indicating a specific target, whether that's a paper communication symbol, a computer-based communication device, anything in between, without any intermediary steps. So most obviously, it includes the picture that I have here of my finger getting ready to touch my iPad and select a letter here. Maybe to press the button, maybe to pick up a symbol and hand it to someone. If an individual can touch a low-tech communication board or a communication device, and here's the key, accurately and efficiently, there may be nothing else that's needed. I mean, that's kind of like the maybe the easiest way, because you don't need to find additional equipment. But for many individuals, direct selection is possible, but there still needs to be some additional tools, some additional supports in place. So it could be a stylus that I hold in my hand to touch the screen. It could be a laser that's used to point at a low-tech communication board or even objects in the room around me. Direct selection via head pointing, which is the third thing on my bullet here, can involve a head stick attached to a headband or maybe a hat that's used to point to or touch a communication board or a device. It could include a device like the head mouse, which is pictured here, or the glass mouse, which are just two different forms of higher tech head pointing. It uses its cameras and reflections to move the cursor around a screen. And so it provides another way of direct selection with an additional high-tech kind of tool. And finally, eye tracking or eye gaze is really considered to be direct selection as well. It could be directly looking at a word or a letter or a photo on a big eye gaze frame or on a communication device. And so here you see a communication device that has an eye gaze camera system at the bottom here. So the commonality in all of these, whether it's high tech or low tech, is that we're making a selection by indicating a specific target without any intermediary steps. So given that, if that's direct selection, then indirect selection, you can probably guess, means that there's some kind of intermediary step between what I'm physically doing and selecting my target. Basically, indirect selection is scanning. And I'm scanning in multiple different ways, and I can scan in high tech or low tech ways And so we'll talk just briefly about a few different kinds of scanning. And you can see here on the screen, 3 of the 300, I don't know, different kinds of switches
So
that
many.
are out there. There's a lot of different kinds, a lot of different placements. And that certainly is a huge part of figuring out this alternate access. But let's just talk a little bit about scanning without necessarily looking at a specific switch that I'm using to make a selection. So partner assisted scanning is really just exists in the low tech world. With it, a communication partner points to options. Maybe it's on a communication board or an alphabet board or actual objects, and is basically offering choices. This one, is it this one? Is it this one? And I might be naming them. Is it A? Is it B? Is it C? Waiting for the individual to indicate yes, using some predetermined symbol, whether that's looking up, whether that's moving a body part, making a noise, whatever that is. If the communication partner narrates, like I was doing, the choices, is it A? Is it B? Should we play bingo? Should we play, of course, every other game is, I'm not able to think of it right now, but naming or narrating those choices means that I'm using a form of auditory scanning. And auditory scanning can be that low-tech partner-assisted scanning, or it can also be done on a high-tech system where the communication device is providing that prompt of what the choice is, and then the individual is using whatever their switch is in that case to make a selection. The last 2 bullet points here are different types of scanning that we might find on a communication device. So auto scanning is kind of the high-tech communication device corollary to partner assisted scanning. So different communication devices kind of name this differently or do this differently, but basically the device is highlighting one button, then the next button, then the next button, then the next button. And the individual only needs to activate their switch when it gets to the one that they want. Now it doesn't have to go from one to the next to the next. It could offer a whole row and then the next row and the next row, that kind of thing. But essentially the individual is only selecting their switch or touching their switch or hitting their switch, all kind of terms that we use a lot, when it gets to the thing that they desire. Step scanning is a little different than that. Oftentimes requires 2 switches and maybe 2 different places for those switches to be, 2 different ways to access those switches. One switch actually moves the choice from A to B to C to D to E, from bingo to guess who to go fish to whatever those other choices are. And then the second switch is the picker. It actually makes the selection. So the individual's a little bit more in control of not only what they're selecting, but how they're getting to that selection. So those are just a few different types of scanning, whether it's low tech or high tech. Communication devices have lots of different variations on that, but at least it gives us an idea of basically at the root what scanning is. And I noticed that there's a bunch of, oh, thank you for giving me other game choices. I did think of a few on my own, but yes, Connect 4 and Uno would have been excellent choices as well. All right, so I just want to make sure before I close out this section that we get to, okay, so Kristin, you've talked about direct and you've talked about indirect, but the name of this fireside chat was alternate or alternative access. What do you mean by that? So what I mean by that is, oops, sorry about that. What I mean by that is basically alternate access or alternative access is touch, not direct selection specifically, but touch versus anything else. So touch versus maybe using a head mouse, maybe using eye gaze, maybe using some sort of scanning. So what we're really focusing on tonight is anything over here on the right-hand side, which could be touch using a pointer of some sort, touch or direct selection using eye gaze, or any of those different variations of scanning, whether it's high tech or low tech. I'm going to throw one more term in here because it comes up in the questions that you guys asked us, or someone asked us ahead of time. And that's this idea of multimodal access. So sometimes it's not a versus kind of situation. It's not an either or situation, but it's an and. So sometimes I use touch and another form of access. Sometimes I use eye gaze and another form of access. And with a couple of the questions, I think we'll get into this context or this concept of multimodal access. So I wanted to make sure we touched on it briefly here. So Sabrina, you touch your AAC to talk. Mike, oh, maybe I'm just not seeing him on here. Mike, do you want to share with us how you access your AAC? Because I think that's important to see that there are differences. So Mike is saying he's raising his hand, so we'll wait for just a moment.
What is the watch switch? I haven't seen that one before.
Oh, the watch switch. Yeah, the one that looks like it looks like an Apple Watch or a, I have an Android version of it. Yeah, some person. Christie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So that switch that you saw in the slide is called the Neuro Node. Control Bionics, the company that Kristin and I work for, are actual manufacturers of the Neuro Node. So this is a little bit more of a unique switch. It's a newer switch on the market. I would say it's a very high tech and highly specific switch as well. And the thing that's interesting about the Neuro Node, how it compares to other mechanical switches, like you saw in the slides, a Jelly Bean or a Big Mac are two really popular ones, is that it's wearable. So it actually goes on the individual client. And we can place it really on any muscle of the body, and it picks up that client's movement. So if they want to give us something as small as just a little finger flexion, maybe raising their eyebrows, tapping their toe, we can set the levels or the thresholds essentially to pick up exactly how much movement we want that, or that individual can tell us exactly how much movement is comfortable for them to use to access as a switch. Did you have another question?
Email.
Can you use it to access email?
You.
Oh, we all have, I think we can provide our emails to where if you want to email me directly, if you have more questions about the Neuro Node specifically and how it works, I'd be happy to share that towards the end. Or I'm sure Kristin can type it out on a slide and we can share it if anyone wants to write that down. Oh, you're still muted.
I could, if I could remember how your email went, because all of our emails are slightly different. So
I could type
it in. That would be awesome.
Yeah, no problem. That's fine.
All right.
That's a great question though. It's a very unique switch and how it registers movement. I think, and the types of clientele that we work with are also very diverse. We work with individuals that have lots of movement and some individuals that, we're really trying to find really small muscle contractions to use so that they can access their device.
I am using an ALS.
You're using an ALS?
Yeah.
I'm not as familiar with.
Is that a specific kind of switch?
S. Y. System.
I'm going to have to look that up,
I
Mike.
don't know if
'cause
I'm familiar
yeah.
with that one.
It is.
Seems like a
Hey.
very
Headrest.
Yeah,
Oh, it's a headrest, kind of
Are
like
your
maybe an
switches-
array.
yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Excellent. Sabrina, you're using an i10. Okay, great. Sure.
Oh, and
All right.
I10. Mike uses.
So we thought we would get started with some of the questions that were posed when you guys registered. I have no idea who submitted any of these questions, so you might be on, you might not be on. You might be able to help us answer the questions, or, and I'm hoping this is true in some of the cases, you might want to provide us with a little bit more background or maybe narrow it. Now, I will say that we did get some questions that weren't specifically related to alternate access. So we kind of prioritized the ones that were related to access. And then we'll see where we're at with time. But I have a question that I'm going to ask Christie and let her handle this first one. So the question was, what eye gaze devices do you find easier to calibrate? And which language systems offer the easiest navigation for eye gaze access?
Awesome. I think I find that the ease of calibration is really more about the individual that's using the device, maybe and their unique needs versus the actual device itself. If you guys are on this call, you might be familiar. There's a wide range of eye gaze device manufacturers. Some of them provide different cameras. So what's interesting is being in my role as assessing different clients for eye gaze, we do offer a couple of different eye gaze camera, and there's really no kind of one camera that works with every individual. It's really just very specific to their unique needs. And there's so many different things that can affect accuracy and success. A couple of those things, and it's not even limited to this list here, would be positioning. And I think that positioning is probably one of the most important things when looking with eye gaze, because you can have an individual who can calibrate beautifully, but if the positioning is off on the device a couple of inches, if it's too high, if it's too low, it can really affect their accuracy. So positioning is something that is really important when looking at kind of helping that individual have the most success with getting a good calibration and then accessing the different points of the screen. Other things that can kind of influence success might be glare from glasses. I've even seen glares from like medical equipment, other things in the room. So it's really nice if you're looking at different devices, if the camera has maybe a video view. A lot of cameras provide kind of an avatar view that'll tell you exactly where to position the device. But if you can find a manufacturer that also provides a real life video view, then that'll really help to ensure that the camera is actually picking up that individual's eyes versus maybe a glare from the glasses or external lights. Those things are going to kind of present themselves in that video view. The video view is also going to really help with positioning. So if the client maybe has their head tilted to one side, ideally, you're going to want to tilt the device to kind of be in line with their head. And it's also going to help with positioning. A couple of other device and camera manufacturers will allow you to maybe only track one eye. So if one eye has a little bit more of a droopy lid, or it's having a really hard time catching that right eye or left eye, that could be from again, glare from glasses, dry eyes, droopy lids, different things like that. We can actually have it turn off the reading of one eye so that it's only picking up maybe the stronger eye, and we're able to get more success with that. Trying to think if there's other things. Glasses can also influence maybe accuracy. Different like lenses, like a bifocal, a trifocal, or a progressive lenses, because especially if you're looking at a bifocal or a trifocal, there's actually different prescriptions, in those lenses, which the camera could think, or different types of eyes. So that could affect the accuracy as well. I would say looking at softwares, is kind of the same thing with softwares. It really depends on the the unique individual and what their needs are to see what is the best software choice for them. So a lot of my adult clients, they really gravitate to something that's a little bit more text-based. They want to have access to a keyboard as well as quick access to pre-stored phrases, maybe quick access to other things like email and phone, web browsing apps, social media, things like that. So that's always something that you're going to kind of look for to say, what is your client's individual's needs on the device for the software? Another thing to kind of look at for software would be how edible is it as far as moving icons around on the screen. So maybe if they struggle with the upper right-hand corner and we don't want the speak button there or the clear button there, maybe a high navigation, a button that's going to need to be used frequently, we can potentially move the location of that so that it's a little bit easier for them to access on their system, especially once they're learning and kind of picking up the visual location of those icons. If you're looking at a symbol-based communicator, that's also going to be based upon their unique needs, as well as maybe how their calibration are. How many calibration points are they able to do? 2 versus 5. So we might need to start with some larger icons, as well as providing different visual support. So adjusting the colors, the background of the color of the device, the font of the text, the different symbols, different things like that can also influence their accuracy with the eye gaze system. To name just a couple of softwares that I'm familiar with, Grid 3 does offer a couple of different symbol-based as well as text-based options, as well as if you're using a Tobii system, Snap Plus Core is also a really nice symbol-based option, as well as Communicator 5. Some individuals like to utilize Unity on a PRC. So there's a lot of different options, but I think it's kind of looking at what features do those softwares give you that is going to be best suited for your client's needs.
So Christie, I would just throw in there as well that sometimes we might think, someone who is a literate communicator wants to use a keyboard, we can just put that whole keyboard up on the screen, but that flexibility of being able to have larger cells is not only true for our little kids who are symbol communicators, but it could be true of our adults with ALS or some other condition too, because even while, cognitively they're able to handle it, they just might physically not be able to access all those buttons. And part of what you said was, I might only be able to calibrate on 4 or 5 or 6 locations versus what's the most, like 9 16. Or 16.
Yeah.
And if I can only calibrate 4 or 5 or 6, that means I'm probably going to have better success with bigger buttons on the screen versus, and that's not across the board, and it's not, doesn't mean that we can't progress into being able to be more and more and more accurate, but it might mean that I need to start with bigger buttons and then and work around that.
Oh, definitely. I have a lot of adults who the end goal is to be able to navigate a QWERTY keyboard independently, but based upon what we're able to get when we're first introducing that eye gaze. I mean, eye gaze, if anyone here on the meeting has ever trialed it, it's challenging. I mean, it is different, and it takes some practice and some learning. So it's kind of just starting with larger cell keyboards, and it's a 2-hit. Essentially, you have 6 to 7 letters on one page that you're going kind of back and forth just to start with the practicing and to get some accuracy and kind of your routine down a little bit with using the system. So I think having the option to be flexible within the software, I should say, because we know that those individuals' needs might be changing over time while they use the device, so that software can kind of grow and change and develop with that individual as they get a little bit more efficient with their system. Any other, I guess, before we kind of move on to our next question, which is not dealing with eye gaze specifically, are there any other comments or anything from anyone on the meeting about eye gaze before we move on? Okay. So my next question will be for Kristin. What are some switch scanning strategies for young children learning language? 2 to 5 years old. The individual said they're motivated and engaged to scan animal sounds, books, music, etc., but the motivation and threshold seems to significantly drop off when scanning language and using language, which I think we see with so many different, I see this with adult clients too, to be honest with you.
Right, sure. So I think the key here and the really beneficial piece here is that the individual who wrote this said those kids are motivated by something. So one of the biggest things is finding those motivators. And I have worked with a lot of individuals who say, well, they just don't seem to be motivated by anything, which is a harder situation than this question right here. So I'm going to start with this question right here, where they are motivated by animal sounds, by animated books, by anime. I agree, Tana. Everyone is motivated by something. It's not always obvious, but I think it is. I totally agree with you. So what if we can take something that's obviously a motivator and then use language as a way to access that? So I think part of what sometimes we do is we have fun and then we have language, and language is all about find this symbol or show me this, which isn't necessarily language. It might be pointing to a component about language, but it's not necessarily language in and of itself. Or we transition to, okay, I know that you want to listen to the animal sounds, so tell me, listen animal sounds. And I'm having to put a message together. And that may be a great end goal. But initially, I think the transition, the important piece that gets left out is learning that communication is motivating because it helps me to do the things that I want to do, or it gives me access to the people. So it may not even always be that I'm motivated to ask for the animal sound, but maybe I'm motivated to get my teacher or my sister or my mom to do something silly, or to play Simon Says, or to come give me a hug, or whatever it is, and start to see that language is the key to getting those. So maybe it's transitioning from scanning on that simple switch game to make the animal noises, to having those animals be something that I can ask for, or having a board where I may have the same number of choices, but now I'm saying I'm giving directions and I'm getting the people around me to do something. Maybe that is not creating novel language, but it is giving the individual the idea that that communication, it has value, that it can be motivating. It can get me things. It can help me interact. It can give me attention, whatever it is that I might want. And so that usually is my next recommendation when we have someone who says this, like, what can we do to change the way we're approaching it? So now we're communicating about those fun things. And then once we get that buy-in, that okay, yeah, there is cool things that can be gained by communicating with us, then we can do all sorts of things about going deeper and going wider and going, learning more and more and more language. But first we have to get that understanding of what the point is even. And Tana, I saw your comment there that as someone who does a lot with AAC, and we don't always see that it's hard to learn access and language at the same time, to practice two difficult things at the same time. So the other, I love this recommendation too, is separating them and saying, yeah, we can work on access. We can make that better with some of those fun switch games and other activities. But and let's also work on showing how language can be powerful and motivating and important, using a method that's not so hard for me physically. And so maybe partner assisted scanning, or taking something that I can still show that I'm knowledgeable, but I don't have to work so hard at it. And then over time, we can put those together because we're working on and improving success with them separately. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And Jamie, I like your point too, that it's not necessarily about the activity and the beauty of this activity that we've created and we've spent all this time on. We forget the principles of natural language opportunities. We forget that when we're working with young kids that are learning, we don't always make it super easy for them. We don't always make a perfect activity. We're just kind of experiencing things and oh, they said something or they can't get into something that they want to. Let's take that opportunity and build on it as well. Absolutely. Oh, so Tana brings up modeling and prompting. Yeah, and modeling and prompting what the child might want to say versus what we might want to say. So I'll give an example. I was actually preparing a session for closing the gap. And one of the things that I was talking, actually, I was kind of moderating a conversation between a team of individuals who was working with a young man who's about 15 years old, who had over the last year plus a few months had gotten a new communication system. And so we were kind of following their progress through that. And I thought, you know what, it would be really great at the end of this to have in his words what he wanted, what he saw his vision for the future was. So his speech pathologist at school asked him, and his answer was, I don't want to. Because at that point in time, he didn't want to answer the question. It wasn't that he didn't have opportunities to, or he didn't have words to, or anything like that. He was saying what he really wanted. And at that point, it wasn't to talk about his future. It may have been to not do anything. It may have been to do something more fun. But those kind of things, I bet you his team modeled for him and allowed him the ability and for him to know that it would be okay to say something like that and he wouldn't be forced to do it. So I was like, that is perfect. Yeah. So great comments. Anyone want to add anything to that conversation, that question? Oh, Mike has his hand up.
Yeah.
How old should they be before we think about using I? Because I know it can be so tiring. I am always scared about trying I with 2 to 7 years old kids.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like every single question that has been asked us, Christie and I said, well, it kind of depends.
Of course.
So I'm going to preface this question with, well, it kind of depends. Honestly, Mike, I have seen, I don't know, probably 18-month-olds. Maybe that was the youngest.
I have an 18-month-old that we try, eye gaze really was going to be based upon how she presented at the time and what we knew about her diagnosis in the future. The preferred and probably primary access method that was going to be available to her that we knew of, and okay, let's go in and give it a try. And I was shocked at what we saw, especially utilizing kind of real life pictures that were things in her environment to motivate her to tie that in with the language, just to get her started was amazing to see. So I would agree with you, Kristin. Yeah, 18 months is the youngest that I've kind of introduced it, but again, it just depends.
Wow.
But I'm going to offer a caveat because, Mike, I want to respect what you said about it being tiring, and either tiring because I'm getting lots of things that I don't want, or tiring because I have to look at that item. I have to look at the screen for so long, and then I have to look at the one I want for so long. I don't think either Christie or I was trying to say that would be the only thing we would want to do with that 18-month-old or even that 4-year-old or 5-year-old. that we need to have at that point multimodal access, and different ways to work on both communication and on access, because we don't want to cause someone to either want to give up on something because it's so hard, or to develop bad habits that are going to maybe make it harder for them in the future. And I don't know, I'm not trying to say that eye gaze itself can become a bad habit, but I know that there have been switch sites that some people have used that have ended up feeding into patterns that aren't particularly helpful. And I guess I should at this point say Christie and I are both speech pathologists who have had the privilege of working with occupational therapists. And most of what I know from regarding access comes from the people who are using AAC that I work with and those occupational therapists, because they're really the ones who are good at troubleshooting and figuring this out. It's great for us as speech pathologists to know the different options that are out there. But I should put that caveat on that, really having someone like an occupational therapist or physical therapist to help with that positioning and seating is really important. Yeah, we don't want to break motor trying to force language. That is a much more succinct way to put it than I just said. So yes, absolutely. All right. Okay. I'm going to ask, do we have an OT out there? Maria, you're raising your, well, no, just agreeing. All right.
Could you expand a little bit more on how it would look like to learn access and language at the same time, but separately? Because I have somebody that I see specifically like that. She has a lot to say, but she's very unintelligible in her access. She needs a lot of help with access and language.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would be using some of the principles that Kristin had described at the beginning of the presentation with partner assisted or maybe auditory scanning specifically. So versus kind of having both, if she needs an alternative access, whether that be switch access or eye gaze, if we're looking at switch access potentially specifically, I think separating those two tasks. So whatever movement that she or you're looking at to access the switch, we can use that movement as a communication movement during partner assisted scanning. So it could be something, if we're going to take it really basic, something very motivating to her, whether that be iPad or bubbles or food or whatever it is that's very motivating to her. And you can auditorily or on a picture board present it to her, and then maybe ask her to initiate that movement or a similar movement that we are going to introduce that switch site to. And then you take that movement and turn it into language. So we're kind of taking the device out of it and taking a robust communication system out of it, and just having her pair the movement with a communicative function. You can also introduce the switch just by itself. And the switch could have a single output voice message that maybe just says go. So go is giving her lots of different things in her environment that we're making go, that's motivating to her, without necessarily waiting for and kind of pairing it with the timing of a scan and giving her 2 choices or 3 choices or 4 choices. So we're really just looking at the motor movement by itself, but as well as kind of language. And then once you have a pattern developed, then you can potentially, if you're working with a higher tech device or maybe multiple switches, kind of build a page set that's very similar to how you've been communicating with her, either on a low tech board or just your voice, and kind of seeing how she does with pairing the 2 together. Also, too, on some high-tech devices, there are switch activated games that you can use and just provide 2 very basic options. And so again, they move their body, they activate the switch, they immediately get a response. When I'm introducing switch access to younger children specifically, I really try to, whatever, again, usually it's tied to some sort of motivator. It's not necessarily language, it's just games, music, cartoons, iPad. It's as soon as they make that movement or activate the switch, they get that response immediately. Sometimes I think, and I did this a lot as an SLP, you have a lot of things going on. They activate the switch. Okay, great. Let me grab my phone and we're going to pull up music. Just wait a couple seconds. It's coming. But we really want to, like, as we're introducing that alternative access method, give them that immediate feedback so that they realize I moved my body and this affected change in my environment. Because we, you know, depending upon where they are, we want them to have that cause and effect of the body movement can affect change, which then in turn we can build that to mean language. And then just like what we talked about, I mean, once you have the language, it can, you know, turn it into so many different things. Try the chat here. I often teach my kids with complex bodies, partner-assisted scanning while they're working on their switch or eye gaze access and play and environmental controls activities. Yes, exactly. Offering practice time where access and language come together with less complexity. Exactly. You're really just looking at just that movement, and then they can learn over time. I think really the biggest thing is that the movement is affecting change somewhere, and then we can add the language to it. And then you can also work on the comprehension of language separately. What does go mean? What does stop mean? What does more mean? Or wherever they are with their cognition. And then you can tie it into however they're accessing their device, whether that be through symbols, auditory prompts, 3D objects. I mean, there's so many different avenues you can kind of explore with that. Yes. I love Linda Burkhart. Karen, if you're looking for like individuals that talk about switch activities and complex bodies specifically, Karen Kangas. She's an occupational therapist. She has lots of resources, and you can find some of her talks as well as webinars. And she is a wealth of knowledge in that area specifically, as well as Linda.
So I'm going to take this concept a step further and talk a little bit about even when someone has figured out how to be pretty consistent and effective with their access method, how it's still probably beneficial to continue to separate the language and the access to some degree. So same gentleman or young man I was talking about earlier was using a pod pragmatic organization. Oh my gosh.
Is it dynamic?
Type it out for me.
Dynamic display.
Dynamic display.
I was going to say that, and then I thought, no, that doesn't make any sense. Sorry about that. Gail Porter from Australia is the author, and certainly Linda Burkhart has worked with for quite a bit. Pod was originally developed as a low-tech communication system, and it has since been developed on several different high-tech communication systems. So this young man was using like a 6-location pod on his communication device. So he would scan, and I'm pretty sure he was doing what's considered linear scanning. So if you look at your Zoom boxes on your screen, he was going from the upper left-hand corner to the next one next to it, to the one next to it, to the second row, to the one next to it, to the one next to it. So he was going through, you know, the variety of options and hitting a switch when he got to the right one. He did also have auditory cues on his because he had some visual issues, and we'll hopefully be able to talk a little bit more about that. But while he was working with that, he also was going into a classroom with students who were using pod displays some on communication devices, some off communication devices, with 20 or 30 or 40 different locations, so that they had access either to more language or to language with fewer steps in between. And so his team was getting him accustomed in a low-tech way to using more language, to putting together more things. And then he would eventually, that would transition to his communication device. But he was doing something that was motorically easy most of the time, and then being challenged with language in something that was also motorically easy for him. And then eventually they have transitioned him so that he's using something a little bit more on his device. So it's not just a beginning step, it can also happen throughout. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to ask Christie another question here. And actually, Christie, I'm going to skip a couple on our script because I see what time it is, and I think this is a really important question.
Mhm.
So a couple people asked in slightly different ways, how do we find AAC to trial with clients who don't have access to anything at home? Or maybe as a clinician working in a setting where I don't have a ton of equipment available to me, or I don't even have a lot of AAC clients. Where can I find equipment to trial?
Yeah. So every state should actually have a lending library of different types of assistive technology. A lot of times you can get on their website and see what they actually offer. And so sometimes that's a really good starting point. Maybe if you don't know what it is, you can reach out to the individual that works at the lending library, and they can describe your client. They can provide a couple of suggestions for you, as well as a good starting point to do some research to kind of see like what technology is out there. I can tell you, just since I've been in school almost 10 years ago, the type of technology that is available on the market has significantly changed. So just being in the high-tech world that we are in right now, there might be something that's available, commercially available on the market that's a little bit more specific for your client that you're looking for than what the lending library offers at the current time. And actually most vendors will provide trials of devices. A lot of vendors actually do free trials with the different equipment. Universities are also a really great place to reach out to. A lot of times they also have a lending library or assistive technology equipment. And then, different schools and things like that. But your vendors are a nice resource. Oh, and Tanya said they have a lending library resource. Perfect, on the website. So I think that's a great place just to start, to just see what's out there. Because as I mentioned, the technology has evolved so much just in the last 10 years. So you could be going into a situation thinking that one type of access, one type of device might be a good fit, but just doing a quick Google search, you might come across something else that piques your interest for your client. And a lot of times you're able to trial that device for free or over a specified period of time.
I think with the advent of a lot more, this isn't necessarily device, but software related,
yeah.
with the advent of a lot of apps, there are free versions or trials that I know I've used as a clinician. I have a small private practice, and I have used various trials in that private practice. I might need to then purchase something. I might need to get a fully functioning version to try, but at least it's a way to say, yes, this looks like what I thought it was going to be, or no, it doesn't.
Some of those apps might be half off next month too.
Oh, in October for AAC.
Yes.
Awareness Month. Yes, perfect. Mike, I see you have your hand up. Just in case, oh, there you are, you unmuted. Perfect.
Going back to the watch switch, can they just hit the watch? And that would be how to communicate.
It's possible. If that's what we've done that before, actually, because it's very sensitive. So it does register external movement as well as internal, their movement of their body and the muscles to determine how much movement that wants to be a switch. But yes, it is possible to, depends on what type of movement that you are doing too. We want to make sure it's pretty sturdy, but we'd also want to make sure that it can withstand whatever movement that you're kind of using. But we've used that before.
To you. Have. Anyone. That. Work. For. Your. company. In. W. I. S. Wisconsin. Do you have anyone that work for your company in Wisconsin?
We do. Well, we have reps who can assist you in Wisconsin.
I used to live in Wisconsin, so I would be happy to come and visit. No, we do have a rep who covers Wisconsin. She doesn't live right in Wisconsin, but she's there on a regular basis.
Mike, would it be helpful for me to send an email with you and Christie and Kristin and get that started?
Yeah.
Okay, I will do that.
Awesome. Happy to answer any questions or connect you with anyone. Yeah, and Jamie said, I find it's difficult in outpatient to get the time to reach out for switch and mid-tech options. We rely heavily on schools. Some school districts aren't knowledgeable enough with AT and AAC. In my area, the lending library is through colleges that support schools and support and have collaboration. Definitely working in outpatient myself for so long, I know that you're juggling a lot of different types of clients, as well as, you know, seeing a certain amount of clients throughout the day, your documentation needs that kind of come up. So it can get really tricky when you have a client who maybe needs a very specific type of system and you're maybe not even sure what type of system that they need. So, you know, I think trying to kind of do a little Google search, or the lending libraries are a great place to start, but also to, if you have any questions, like specifically about someone in mind, feel free to reach out to me and I can kind of see if I know anything that might be a good fit for them or a good place for you to start.
Is it okay for me to talk?
Sure.
Yes.
Sorry. I just came from a Nats game. So
Yay.
So my biggest struggle is trying to work with some of these kids, because we get these kids who really could use AAC well, but I don't have the time. And so I would love to have information on your company, because it's important to have all of the options for parents. I think my biggest concern is the time. And I can't explain enough to people who aren't speech pathologists that 30 to 60 minutes is nothing when it comes to trying to train and help practice these skills with kids who need additional supports. So how do you advocate for that? Because that's my biggest struggle right now.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly relate. I think my role is a little bit more of a unique position, because I am a speech pathologist, you know, as well as kind of working with a vendor. So when I go in, I work with these individuals like they are my clients. So I really try to be kind of that SLP's backup to advocate for the client with the family or the school team. We also provide additional training that might be needed. I think one thing that's nice about some of these softwares as well, like if you're worried about time, is the ability to do remote editing. So if you're worried from just like a programming standpoint, okay, I'm not going to have time to sit down with the device and build phrases and buttons for the next, you know, hour and a half, you can actually do it kind of remotely from your computer, depending upon what software you're using, and those changes can kind of be sent to that client's device, but also trying to get the system in an in-home trial so that it's not just with you for those 30 and 60 minutes, you know, a week, maybe starting off there, but really sending it home with very specific goals for the family to work on whenever they have that device. Okay, this week we're just going to have, maybe it's 4 cells or 5 cells. We're just going to work on playing games or activating the switch or whatever kind of the goal is. And kind of maybe going back to what we said, separating the language and the access piece, to where if it's a lot for the caregivers to kind of take in at once, we're giving them baby steps to kind of move and work towards, to where you can kind of work on scaffolding a little bit more and building up whenever you're seeing them in the session.
So just to follow up on that, then the problem for us in outpatient is that in schools, you can see kids, but in outpatient, you can't bill for that. So I can't tell somebody, hey, I have to do these things. So if you are helping us as SLPs, it would be great if you were able to tell insurance companies and other people that this is the time that we need in order to provide the excellent service that
So
we.
I was actually going to.
Thank you, Kristin. I see your face. I appreciate it.
I was going to bring up that same topic, and I wasn't going to telling insurance companies route, but I was thinking management, supervisors, that kind of thing, and providing that support of, hey, in order to really treat these clients, it's not the 45 minutes or 25 minutes or however long, 30 minutes I'm seeing the client directly, but I need that indirect time. And there actually are some codes that you can bill for indirect time for AAC. Now it's more specific to programming and that kind of thing. So it doesn't cover all the stuff you're talking about for sure. But advocating that way for, hey, and there's some ways around that too, with talking about, hey, we can be a center of excellence. We can provide these needed services that are lacking in our general area if we're willing to put, some time and money behind this that are outside of those direct service and the productivity requirements that you might have and all of that. So I have your email address. And so I would be happy to make sure that you have, contacts for us and for your local person from us. And certainly there are local people. If you went to a Nationals game, then I'm guessing you're somewhere in the DC area. So you're going to have access to probably more people than someone in a more rural state might have. So I'll do my best to hook you up with some folks, but also keep that conversation going about how can we advocate it at those other levels.
Yeah. Jamie, and I have some creative workarounds that I can share with you off the record. That I've done private practice settings. In the meantime, while we're getting people to listen to us, sometimes we need something to do right now. Like, how do I help my kids right now? So I will share some workarounds that I've used in the past.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be a part of this whole fireside thing, because you guys give me so much great ideas and opportunities that I don't normally get in my small group.
Yay, that's wonderful. That's awesome. So we are now officially over our time.
Happens every month.
And we've gotten to 4 questions that we prepared. So Tana had the fantastic idea of seeing if Christie and I would be willing to answer a few more of the questions in more of a written Q&A kind of format. And Christie, I answered for both of us. And I said, of course we would.
Sure, of course.
So we will answer some more questions related to this, of information that we had kind of planned for if there was time. And please do, out of this chat window, dig out Christie's and my email addresses, or I can copy them and paste them and stick them back in at the bottom.
And I sent a follow-up to everybody who registered for the event, an email that includes a link to the chat transcript, a link when the video recording is up, and then our group, which is where they can continue to ask questions. And if nobody in the group answers, if you guys are open to it, I can forward those to you. And you can, especially about the Neuro Node, because I think a lot of our group here is curious about the Neuro Node and probably has some questions for you.
Washington, D.C.
And it seems like Mike's got
In
something else to
Wisconsin, we
share.
started to have a quarterly meeting for school professionals on education and assistive technology. We always have a company to come in. You might like to think of starting it in Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
Great.
sounds like Jamie, that one was for you. So Mike, you're saying you guys have a meeting monthly with schools? Is that what you said?
In Wisconsin, we started to have a quarterly meeting for school professionals on education and assistive technology. We always have a company to come in. You might like to think of starting it in Washington, D.C.
All right. So if anyone has trouble getting Christie and Kristin's emails, just let me know and I will share them. Thank you both so much for your time. We might need to have a follow-up on this because, like I said, this is a big, big topic.
Very broad.
Yeah, but I want to respect everyone's time, including the two of you on a Sunday night. So we'll go ahead and close now and hopefully see each other in the online community.
But thank you so much for putting this group together, Tana. It's been fun to talk with and learn from all of you, and we look forward to touching base in whatever way happens in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a good night, guys.